Okay, everybody, welcome back, and I'm going to record this. So what we're going to do is let's just have a little bit of review real quick. This is where we sort of left off. If you remember, we went to the blog site. We grabbed a little texture block. It was a separate image. What was that? We brought that image in, okay? And that image basically gave us this. It gave us those squares right there, okay? And then we started talking about textures. So let me back up and just give you guys a couple little reminders and a couple things to do. So one of the things that I noticed, a habit that some people do that are first learning Photoshop, they leave the lock on the bottom layer. So always check your bottom layer, make sure there's not a lock on it. When that lock's on, it changes the way some of the layers work because it's locking part of the file, and when you erase or do some other options, it can act a little funky and different, okay? So number one, make sure the lock's off, okay? Number two, one of the things that we talked about was our little box outline right here. Sometimes I like to label that line because it's a line drawing that I'm painting underneath. Does that make sense? And so remember, I had you come over here and I had you lock that layer. So to lock that layer, there were a couple ways that we did it. One is that we had copied and pasted that image inside here, right? And then to lock it, we just hit the lock. And the hotkey on our keyboard is the question mark. By hitting that question mark, it'll lock it as well. Okay. What's really important right now is you need to sort of make sure that you do have layers on though, and your layers are labeled. Okay. So just what I usually do when I'm working at home is I always label like, hey, that's my line drawing because I don't want to paint on that. Okay. The other thing we did is when that layer is selected, we put it on to multiply. Okay. So the reason why we put it on multiply is if I leave it on normal right now, and if I want to come down and paint a texture underneath that, so if I grab my brush here, let's grab a pretty color. Let's grab a blue of some kind. So if I want to come in here, and if I want to paint, and if I hit B, nothing is going to show right now because I have the layer. So let me show you. So if I'm painting, I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening? Nothing's there. But if I turn this layer off, oh wait, it's there. Because when a layer is on full opacity, it's like a white piece of paper, okay? So by turning the layer on to multiply, it allows us to see through that. So now if I come back up here to line drawing, right? And so look really quick on the right-hand corner of my screen. When I have line drawing selected, you'll see right up there, these are all the options for the layers. So if I just click on that box up there, those are all the different layer settings that people can use to make really cool looking stuff. Right now, for most of this class, we're probably just going to use normal and multiply. But later on, when you get more advanced, you'll be able to come in and turn layers into different settings and they'll have different effects. Okay? So watch what happens when I put that on multiply. Boom, now I can see the color underneath. Okay? So what I was trying to get you guys in the habit of doing last class is when you're working is to create your layers and label your layers as we're painting textures, right? So we would have a layer that's called base. Okay, it'll be like the base color. We have another layer that might go above it that might be called mids, or it might be called texture. We have another layer that might go on above that called highs. I'm not telling you how to label your layers, but when I work from home, I have this tendency when I'm painting is I do this. I create a couple layers like this. See this? I have 4 layers right now. I'm going to click this one, and I call that base. Okay, you could label it whatever you want. I think of it as, hey, that's my base color right now. Then I come back over here. I'm going to double click on the layer. Some people were double clicking in the middle of the layer, and that brings up the layer options. Okay, we don't want that. We want to click where the little font is, where it says layer 2. By clicking on that, it highlights it. I can come back up and I could call this my mid layer. And then I might come up here and I might say, hey, this is going to be another mid layer, and this one up top might be highs. Okay. The reason why I'm trying to get you used to working like this is so it's easier to make adjustments in Photoshop when you have multiple layers set up. And then later on, the demo that I did last week is when I compressed them all together, I had these textures that went together like that. Okay. All right. So the other thing we talked about is I gave you guys my brushes. Okay, I'm going to come back here to base. And, okay, we talked about brushes and how to load the brushes and bring them back in. Does anyone have a question on that? Because that was a little bit more of a longer detailed, but I'll just quickly cover it because this is review, right? The way we got that back in is by clicking B, which is the hotkey for brush, and when we right click with our mouse, we get a sample of the brushes, and then we have this little gearbox right there. That gearbox is going to be present in most of the tools in Photoshop, and that gearbox has some type of functionality that deals with that particular layer. Okay, so in this case, I can select that gearbox. I came over here and I grabbed one of my brushes here, or for example, I have these labeled. There's the painting section that are all right there. So right here, you can see these two brushes, 25 and 175. Okay, what if those are actually my block-in brushes. What if I don't want those brushes there and I want to move them over a little bit? Remember I told you guys how you could save brushes, delete brushes, or move them around? You do that in what's called the preset manager. To get to the preset manager, I come over here, I click this icon, I scroll right down here to preset manager, and it brings up this other window. When it brings that window up, I can take number 25 and I can just highlight it and drag it and put it right in the front. And I could take number 175 there and put it in the front if I wanted to. Okay? And then when I'm done, I hit done. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to start to paint some type of a texture. Okay? So I'm on my base layer. I double check it. Okay? I have this blue, and you'll see what's happening is I'm painting, and I'm actually using one of my drawing brushes. Okay, this drawing brush right here, okay, it's a large spaceship, but I found by putting jitter on it and adjusting it and having a sensitivity, I can get some really cool, like scratchy looking elements that happen inside, and it can be very beneficial for when I'm comping something out. Okay, remember, textures can be created in different ways. Okay, later on we're going to look at some textures this week, like wood, and we're going to try to mimic those textures by painting them in. Okay, so for this texture, what I talked about in review of last week is we threw down a base color. I talked about working from darker to lighter. Okay, so now that I got that base color down, I'm going to come over here to mids, and I might select my mids, and then I'm going to right click and grab a different brush, and I might grab something like this. That's a very textured brush. It's showing me an image of what that brush looks like. If you open up your brushes and you were seeing this right now, small thumbnail, or some of you might even be seeing this, a list. Okay, the brushes are shown in different ways. It's easier to see the brushes when I like to see them the full size so I know what the brush is. So I fix that by coming over to that gear. I click that gear and I scroll down and I put it on large thumbnail, and then it shows me. Another really common way outside a large thumbnail is this one, the stroke thumbnail, because a stroke thumbnail shows you what the brush is going to do when you go to draw or paint with it, which is why a lot of artists like to use this. I don't know many people that use the list option unless it's something very specific. Okay, all right, so with that done, what I was asking you guys to do is to go in and start painting some textures. And there's different ways to paint textures. We can work from dark to light. We can work from medium to dark. We can add in different elements. So let me just go through a couple different things really quick. You guys remember also when I showed you the selection tools? Remember when we worked on the robot in the grass field and we were selecting and copying and pasting, right? Well, I can also use those selection tools when I'm making textures. Let me show you how. Okay, so right now I'm here on my base. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm looking at that color. Now, if I want to make that color a little bit darker, it's on a separate layer, correct? So if I want to make that color a little bit darker, how can I make it without repainting it? Does anyone remember? We talked a little bit about that on the first exercise. Under Image and Adjustments, we have a whole page of different adjustments that could come up that would apply to a layer. Okay, so if I were to come over right now and go under Image, Adjustments, all these different adjustments right here allow me to affect that color that's on that layer. So if I were to come over here, let's say I go to brightness and contrast, and if I pull that up, if I slide brightness around, you see what it's doing? Is it's changing that layer by adding white or black to it, which is by adding black. That's why white and black are technically not colors. They call them tints and shades. The reason for that in color theory is this, is that the local color right here is that. If I add more white into it, it turns it into a soft pastel. If I add more black into it, it turns it into a darker color. So the color itself, or what I call the hue, is actually staying the same. I'm just adding white or black to it, which is changing it, and that's why using brightness and contrast, that's what it's doing for me. So if I want to make that darker, I don't always have to go in and paint it darker. I can just select it using my going up under image and under adjustments. I have all those adjustments, okay? Now, let's say though I'm working in Photoshop and I'm working on something else that's got a rust tint to it, let's say. Hold on. Okay, so let's say I'm working right here. Uh-oh. Go on, get a little bigger. There we go. So let's say I'm working right here and I'm working on another texture right now. Let me just throw this in here really quick, okay? So I'm working on another texture. What happens right now if I go under image adjustments? Let's say I painted that block in and it's a little too orange. I want it to look a little bit red. I want to adjust it. So if I go under image adjustments and scroll over and I go down to color balance, which I showed you in the first lecture, right? What happens when I add more red? It's also affecting the other one. So I need to tell Photoshop not to do that. How do I do that? Well, it's really simple. I come over here, I take my marquee. Remember, we have our selection tools we talked about the first exercise. It's my marquee tool and a lasso tool. So it depends. I can do one of two things. I can come over here, drag the marquee over that, and now I've told the computer only affect the area inside this box. I could do that, or if I wanted to, I could hit L for the lasso tool. I could come over and I can draw a lasso like this around it. And now if I go under image and go to adjustments, what's happening? I go down to color balance, and I bring this up. It is no longer adjusting the blue square. You see that? It's only adjusting what I selected. So the importance there is I could quickly paint in any base color, and I could modify that color really efficiently and quickly, not by having to repaint it, but by using some of the image adjustments. Let me show you the 3 to 4 most common image adjustments that we are going to be using in this class, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select the blue for this. So, and note, some of you will do this. What did I just do there? I didn't select the corner there. Do you see that? So if I go to adjust this right now, image, and I go to adjustments and go to brightness and contrast, I want to darken it. That corner is staying lighter because I didn't adjust it. So I have to think of that. So I have to come over here right now and I have to select the whole thing, right? So let's just look at, let me show you, I was going to tell you, what are the 3 common adjustments we're going to do? One's going to be brightness and contrast. So you'll notice, look at this window. Do you see the little lines in there separating them? Okay. See that line right here? These are for black and white. These are for color. And these are to deal with gradients in black and white separate, almost like applying direct contrast between black and white. Okay. So these are the 2 brackets we're going to be using the most. Is here. We're going to be using these, and I usually use brightness and contrast, okay, or levels. And you're going to be using these 2, hue and saturation or color balance. Okay, hue and saturation brings up this window, and what's cool about it is it has a hue slider. So what it does is Photoshop tells itself, hey, this color blue right here is right in the middle. So if I slide it to the right, I'm just changing the hue of the color. If I slide it this way, I can change it into a different hue. Do you see that? And then not only that, I could also adjust the saturation. So saturation, does anyone know what saturation means? It's a little bit, it's not black and white anymore. It's not tint and shades. Saturation is what we call pure chroma. So if you go back to the 80s and you're watching Miami Vice, t-shirts had pure chroma, like really bright colors. Like you have like certain blues and yellows are like super, super bright, okay? I apply that now at 100. Let's say I decide to go back, I could still go back and apply it again. Image adjustments, I could come down to hue and saturation, and I could even push it more. Okay, now that color is going to top out a little bit, but I can even move this around and see, you're like, wow, that's oversaturated, right? That's that term we use when something is so like bright and powerful, the color's just popping out and it's a little bit too much. If you look at your clothing, we usually don't see super duper oversaturated color in our life, okay? Unless you buy something that needs to be noticed. So if you spend $250,000 on a Lamborghini and you want to be noticed, they paint it super bright saturated yellow or saturated green. Does that make sense? Because you're trying to tell people, hey, look, I just spent 250 grand on a car. Okay? That's the truth of it. That's why people apply those big bright colors. Most of all the color schemes that we use are not in this area of saturation. They're usually down about right here. This is what we're sort of used to in our world, is we see things desaturated about this. In fact, if you look around, everyone in this class either has black or a dark gray on in terms of color, which is going to be a low saturated color, okay? Or you're going to have soft pastels, which means more white. So Cecilia has soft purple on, and you have a soft pink on, and you have a soft blue on. So that's usually how most color schemes tend to work. Okay. The other adjustment that we talked about was color balance. Okay. So what does that mean? It means also to make adjustments. What happens if I do this? What happens if I take my lasso tool and I select parts of this element that I have there? And if I come down under here and go image adjustments, and I go down to hue and saturation, see what I just did? I'm modifying the areas I've selected. So I could take that area that I selected and I can oversaturate it a little bit. Didn't really change much there, but I can pull out a little bit of the color out of it and desaturate it. Now if I hit OK, I have that, right? Now, remember, I hate the ants. So if I hit Control H on my keyboard, it allows me to hide them. Okay? When I hit Control H, again, it brings the ants back. Do you see that? When the ants are busy and they're moving like that, it's hard to see because your eye focuses on the little lines around it. Okay? So, and I'm going to hit H. So my ants are still selected. Now that I have that selected, let's say I want to paint, but the selection's still there, right? Let's say I'm going to grab my brush, so I hit B, and I have this texture brush. I'm going to come in here and go to a much darker version. I'm going to come down and go something dark like this. Now look, my selection's still there, right? So every time I'm touching and painting on this, I'm trying to paint some weird texture on there. Do you see how that's working? Now, my brush is at 100% opacity, right? So when I touch on my lines right here, see that? It's coming down with full force. So if I put my brush on 20% opacity, I could come in here and hit a couple areas, or even go down to 10. And I could softly come in here and I can darken some little spots here to make it look like it's sort of a rusty feel. Do you see that? There. So I just did that. There are my ants. I can hit deselect. And now I have that other sort of change in my color. Now I'm going to come in here. Let's say I want to have a gradient in there, a dark to light feel. Okay, well there's two ways I could do that gradient. One is I could take my brush here with a darker color, and I could come in here and using my pressure sensitivity. I'm not pressing down like this. I'm pressing nice and soft. See, I can define some different areas, and I can create a little bit of darkness in some of the corners, and or I could change brushes. That brush paints like a texture. Yes?
Wouldn't you go with different layers, like you're still on the base?
I could do that too.
Oh, okay.
There's like 10 different ways to do it.
You could go to one layer, go
Yeah, I'm just trying to show you guys, I'm doing a little bit of review and I'm adding in a different approach of using selections and so on. But that's a great question because right now, I was going to get to this, what happens? I'm stuck on one layer. I'm defined to it. So if I did this in a buildup of layers, that would be a great option, right? So sometimes I like to just get into it and paint and I don't care about all that. I just get in there and paint and have fun with it, right? So remember in the brush settings, so I'm going to bring up my brushes real quick. I'm going to go to I want to see them in my large thumbnail, okay? I have this wonderful soft brush right here. Do you see this? This soft brush goes really soft and easy, allows me, I can stroke multiple times on top, and I can get nice little gradients from my corners. And if I hit it at 100%, see, it gets really dark very quickly, okay? But this allows me to come in and sort of create these really cool dark to light sort of patterns on my texture, okay? When you're all done with your texture and you want to clean it up, it's outside of the box, right? You hit Marquee, M, and I come over here and I'm going to drag it. I'm going to drag a box right there and I hit delete. And then I can move the box down to here, hit delete. I come over here and then I hit delete. Okay, delete. And now I have some type of a funky orange texture that looks like it might have a little bit of oxidation in there. Okay, that's just the beginning, right? I could still keep working on that. Some of you guys last week, which was nothing wrong with, you painted your first textures, but you did what you knew, which was you just took a brush and you did what I did, where you just stamped it on there a couple times and you left it alone. What happens now if you come in and you throw a gradient on there? In fact, speaking of that, let me show you, there's another way. Remember I said there are two ways to do gradients? One was by painting. Let me show you another way to do a gradient really quick. Okay, so if I come over here, I'm going to go up to my layer here called mid. There's nothing on mid. I'm going to come down here with the marquee tool and I'm going to create a box right here. Okay, I'm going to come over down here and I'm going to pick two colors to go from dark to light from. So right now, remember if I hit X, it switches the colors, or I hit those little arrows. So right now I have white and I have that red. Well, white can be a little boring. My background's white. Let me pick a lighter, soft, maybe red like that. Okay. So now I have a dark and a light color. Do you see that? If you drag your cursor down and you come down here, you're going to see this little guy here. Some of you might have that. It might be the paint bucket tool. Okay. But if you hold on that paint bucket, you get the gradient tool. Okay. When I touch the gradient tool, if I come up here, every tool that I touch has different uses up here. Okay. The standard is this one right here on the left, which is a dark to light gradient. Do you see the little pattern? Okay, so watch what happens. If I come over here now and I drag this line, it threw a gradient in there for me off of the two colors that I picked. Okay, now watch. Watch what happens if I drag the line only a little bit. It's allowing the darker color to be dominant. Okay, watch what happens if I drag the line a lot. Well, what do you think would happen? The light color will be more dominant. You see that? What if I drag it somewhere in the middle? I get a good range of both colors. Okay, what if I drag it at an angle? It gives me a gradient at an angle. It's a pretty cool tool. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do an average gradient like this, about something about there. The reason why I did this is now on a separate layer. Do you see that? So if I bring this over my current gradient, it blocks it out, right? Right. But if I come over and I put this mid layer onto multiply and I drag it over, aha, now it allows the color underneath to be seen. Okay, but that might be a little too dark. So there's different things I could do. One is I could go to my mid layer right here, which is the layer it's on, and I could go to opacity and I could drop down the opacity a little bit so I can control how the layer reads. Okay, something else I could do is another cool thing in Photoshop is process of elimination. What if I take my eraser right now, I just hit E and I come in here and I just erase chunks of it. like that. But then I come back over and I drop down the opacity and I blend it in. See how I created something new? Okay, there's all these different options. So I wanted to give you a quick review today because I want you guys to start painting on textures. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up I want you guys to do 1 page of textures on your own. So you're learning how to use the brushes, learning how to use the selection tools. I want you to try different layer techniques, but then I'm going to put up some textures for you that you have to mimic. You have to look at. For example, wood. And that'll be a little bit of a struggle. You have to look at wood or you have to look at brick and figure out how am I going to do that with the tools that Phil's showing me. So right now the tools that we know are the selection tools, the lasso, the marquee. Okay, we know how to get brushes in, and we know how to do image adjustments. And under image adjustments, we have black and white, right? And we have color adjustments, right? And so, and then we also talked about using the different types of brushes. Some of you guys have only done a couple of textures from last week, and that's it. So do a full page of textures. Now, here's a comment that I got. I'm going to go ahead and merge all my layers and commit to them, so I have them separate. Someone got to this last week and said, okay, I have that on there, Phil. I'm totally lost and confused. How did you get that to duplicate down your page? We duplicate the layer. Or we select something on that layer and copy and paste it. So look, what layer is this line drawing on right now? The layer called line drawing. So I have 2 options I could do. I could right click on it and I could tell it to duplicate and hit OK. And it did it, but I need to move it. So I hit the move tool and I can bring the other set of texture swaps right down there, right? Right. Okay. And then if I were to do that again, I could right click the one I just duplicated. I can hit duplicate and it would do it again. Or what if I did this? What if I selected what I want on that layer and hit copy paste? And then I hit V and I move that back down to there. See that? Okay, and then I'm going to hit copy paste again. I don't have to hit copy paste again because here's something in Photoshop that's a little neat trick, but you got to remember it. When I hit copy, that keystroke is still inside Photoshop's memory. That makes sense? So all I have to do now is hit paste. So watch what happens. I hit paste 5 times. I just added 5 layers. It just keeps pasting. So I'm going to hit Control Z and go back. Okay, so that's where I was. I hit paste once. There it is. I can bring that down to the bottom. Now, you'll notice that I'm getting really close to the bottom of my page, right? So I need to move all those up a little bit. So what I'm going to do, this is how we move layers. I select this layer. If I hold Shift and touch another layer, see how they're both highlighted? And if I hit V, which is the move tool, I can move those 2 layers up like that. Okay? And then if I come over here and I'm like, oh, wait, I need to move the layers on the bottom. Find the layers on the bottom. Okay? Select them. Hit V. Hit the move tool and I move them up. Okay? There it is. Now, what happens if I had to move my top layer and another layer down here and I hold Shift, it highlights them all. That's when we hit Control. So if I touch the top layer, I come down here and touch the bottom layer. See how I did that? It doesn't choose the layer in the middle. If I hold Shift, it chooses all the layers. So if I had to select all my layers, I go here, I touch all the way to the bottom, and then it selects all of them. But if I only want to touch 2 specific, I hold Control. Okay? Once you get this box set up here, what I'm going to do to make my life easy is this. I'm going to Control E. What is Control E? Does anyone remember that hot command? Nope. It was merge layers because the tip of the E's look like layers. E itself is erase. Control E is giving it a command. So does that make sense? Most of your tools over here are just the letter. So what is lasso? L. What is marquee tool? M. What is brush? B. Okay. What is gradient here? If we hold our cursor over it, G. See how it works? All the tools are separate little keys. When you hit Control or Alt to a key. You're giving it a command, like Control B is color balance. Control H is hue and saturation. Make sense? Okay. So now let me show you something. Maybe this screw. Some of you guys had that right there, right? You're like, oh no, I moved my boxes. It's ruined. It's not ruined. Those textures are on another layer. So I grab those textures. Okay. Oops. I select them. I have V, which is the move tool, and I'm going to move them. Hold on. Why does Photoshop keep doing that? Let me merge all these together. I'm going to put these back. Whenever you merge layers, it takes it back to layer normal. So I'm going to put that back on a multiply and come down here to my textures now. Okay, this is annoying. I've had this problem happen before. I don't know why it's doing it. Every time maybe that's why it's auto select. Every time I'm on a layer and then I go to move it, that's why. It was on this auto select feature. If you have this issue where every time you go to move something, watch, I have text layer selected. Look what happens when I go to move it. It jumps up to another layer. That's because there's this evil little button here called auto select. And Photoshop is telling you, no, I'm just turn it off. It's only there when you're in the move tool. And then now it allows me to move my textures where I want. I can move those textures, and I can use my arrows to get them in place. That was my other row of textures I did. And then what did I do just now? I did those textures, right? So I'm going to grab these. Now this texture really isn't finished right here. So I can go back and work on that texture right now, right? Okay. I want to encourage you to also get into a painterly feel. What do I mean by that? Part of the beauty of Photoshop is having these brushes. To learn how to use a brush, you just have to select that brush, like this guy, and you have to look at what happens. How does the brush work? In a couple different ways. You want to hit 0 to see what the brush does at 100%. And then you want to be able to hit like 30 or 40 or 50 to see how the brush works at a lighter effect. You see the difference? Different brushes have different effects. Some brushes suck at 0 and they're absolutely beautiful at 10 or 20%. See what this brush does? How long did it take me to paint a rusted feel right now? Seconds by using that brush. I have brushes that do later on. I will give you brushes that do clouds. I have brushes that do trees and canopies and leaves. I have brushes that do concrete and all kinds of elements. So when I'm painting, I get to use these brushes to my effect to make something very cool. Okay. So when you guys are painting, I noticed last class, some people are leaving the brush right at 100. And if you do that, you're going to get textures like these two down here. You see that? You're going to get textures that are just a base blue with something light on top of it, and there's no gradient. Real textures, and the way nature works, textures have a natural flow of dark to light in there. Okay? So how do I get a natural flow of dark to light? Well, you start by building up a base texture. So here I'm going to come over on this layer. I'm going to select this. Oh, cool. Phil showed me gradients. So now I can do a gradient from a light green to a dark green. I select my box. I hit G. I drag across. Go down a little bit more like this. Let me go a little bit lighter. I didn't like that gradient. Cool. That's an awesome looking gradient, right? Now that that's done, I'm going to come back up. I have another layer called mid. I'm going to go up on top of that. This time I'm going to see what happens if I go a little bit lighter, and maybe I'll add a little bit more orange into my green like that. And I'm going to come down. I'm going to take another brush. This time I'm going to paint, and I'm going to see what happens with this brush here. I'm going to push 50 on my keyboard, and I'm going to come along here and sort of stroke and see what happens. That has this weird type of effect. So I'm going to go down to 10% and see what happens. Look at that. It builds this sort of neat fuzziness on that texture. Do you see that happening? But now it's getting a really light. So I'm going to color swab and go to a darker color. How do I change my color really quick? I could do two ways. One, I could double tap on the color and I bring it up and change it. Another way is when I'm in paint mode. Okay, if I hit Alt button, look at what happens. I'm in paint mode right now, right? I'm in the brush. If I hit Alt, I can touch that. Watch, my color picker went right to that color. So what's cool about that is I could come over here and do that, and I could say, ooh, I want to put some red on here. And it's putting some red on there. Do you see that happening? It's very lightly. Let me do it a little bit more stronger. There. I could do that if I wanted to. Okay. This is going to be a huge attribute for you, because in a little bit later today, I'm going to put up textures for you guys to paint. You're going to be doing this. You're going to look at that texture and you're going to color swab it by doing that. That's not cheating. This is the benefit of Photoshop. I could come over here and go, ooh, I want some of that bluish teal, and I'm going to touch it, and then I'm going to come over here, make my brush a little bit smaller, go down to about 50%, and I'm going to brush some of that in and see what my texture starts to look like. Okay? And then I look at that and you go, you know what, I like that, but I want it to be a little bit more of a gradient on the bottom. So I go to M, I select my marquee tool, I drag on top right here, I go to B, I'm going to touch to my fuzzy brush, and I come back over here. I'm going to color swab, Alt, that darker color. Then I'm going to pull it up and I'm going to make it even a little bit more darker. Then I'm going to come back in here on the bottom and I'm going to lightly go across and paint in like a dark base. I'll give you guys a little secret that deals with rendering, and it deals with making things look realistic. Ready for the secret? This applies to all of painting, all of rendering. The human eye is interested in gradients. When you have a little gradient from dark to light somewhere, the eye goes and zooms right in on it because it's really interesting to see. In fact, when you get into figure drawing, look at the difference here. Let me Command Z and undo. Look at where that texture was without the gradients on there. You see that? And by me coming in and just hitting the corners a little bit like that, touching a little bit down here, you see how it makes that feel like it could be like old green paint off an old Ford pickup truck? Okay? Just by hitting a little bit of a darker color around the back side makes that color very appealing because it's creating a gradient flow. Anytime you have a flow from dark to light, it makes things more interesting. Okay? All right. So I'm going to hit deselect right now and look at my color, look at the textures I've created. So you'll notice the difference right now between the textures I did last class down here on the bottom. That was me taking the brush tool doing this, right? I was taking my pen going. That's me doing like a stipple technique. Stipple in drawing is when you just touch it and put a dot and you make a bunch of dots in drawing, right? So now you'll notice I started doing more of a painting effect, where now I'm taking the brush and I'm using the sensitivity of the brush to create darken lights inside my piece. So I might select this. I'm going to come back here and be like, oh cool, fill set, hold Alt. Okay. Now, hold on a minute. Let's go back to brush. Why am I getting this weird? Oh, there it is. Okay. So I might take that. I'm going to come in here, punch it a little bit darker. I'm going to come along some of the edges here. And what happens if I just even come down, if I drop my brush down to like 10 or 20% and just do a light, I'm not pressing all the way down, I'm pressing in the middle, and then I lighten up, and then I press again down here. So I'm going to do that in a couple spots. In fact, I could even do this. I can zoom into my texture by hitting Control+, and I could come in here and say, hey, I want to put a little bit of a shadow under part of this. Maybe under a little bit under that guy. I'm going to hit my keyboard. My left hand's always on my keyboard. I'm going back and forth between 10, 20, 30, or 40. So if I hit 6, I'm at 60%. Oh, that's a little too dark. I'm going to go down to 20, so I hit 2 real quick. You guys remember what that does, right? That allows me to get, if I'm at 100, this is what I get. That's too dark, right? I can't use that. But if I press at 20, so if I hit 2 for 20 and go down, that's what I get. So what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to create some cool little stroke patterns inside this texture to see what it starts to look like. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you one quick tool because everyone likes to experiment, and then I'm going to tell you not to use it. See this guy right here? That's called the smudge tool. We don't want to use that right now. Later on, I have really, really nice custom smudge brushes we will use. Okay? Right now, what happens is some of you will bring this in. I'm going to try to do this. Let me hit save first. Okay? Because sometimes some tools in Photoshop suck. And when you use them, it'll lock up the program. Because what will happen is some of you guys will be working and you'll be like this. This will be at 100%. And you'll see what happens there when I smudge it. It's moving the colors around. But this computer has a lot of RAM in it. Some of you guys will be at home. You'll be like, it's not smudging. And you do it like 30 times. See, it's still going. So watch. Watch me pull my hand off. Ready? It's still going. That means the computer's chugging to smudge the colors. Okay? Guess what happens sometimes? You get the wheel of death. And it'll lock up because it's like, you don't want me to do too much at one time. And then you get the wheel of death. And then guess what? The program's locked. You haven't saved. You lost all your work. Okay? We don't want to use that. Okay? So I'm going to click off of that. What is this magic tool that's right above it, though? What's that one called? Let's hold on over it. That's called the blur tool. I wonder what the blur tool does. Maybe it blurs things. Let's try it. That's another tool. If I select that, I go to 100% strength. Okay, I could come over here. Let's just go along an edge. It's not really blurring right now. I don't really like that one. Okay, so you have some of these different tools here. Look at this one. Ooh, sponge tool. Click that tool. See what it does. Flow. Let's get it at 100%. What happens now if I hit this with my sponge? Some of these tools only work when you do certain other techniques, so don't really worry about that. I'm just mentioning because you guys as students are going to want to get in here and start experimenting. Okay? Now, there is another cool tool that I'd like to show you really quick. Hold on. I'm trying to just go through some of these, see if I want to, what I want to show you and not show you. You know, I think that's good for right now. The other ones I could show you a little bit later. Most of these are pretty simple. Look, you have the hand tool that allows you to move something around. You just press V to do that. You have some custom elements in here. You have some different selections. I think that's going to be it for right now for what I want to go over with you. Okay, there's your selection tool. Yeah, that's it. So pretty much we've gone through most of these tools. The type tool, that's for adding type. I'll talk about that later. You can just experiment. The key ones we're using are the move. We're talking about the selections, okay? And on the selection issue, remember that you can do all kinds of funky things with this tool, right? What if I create another layer? Now watch what happens when I hold shift. I have a box there, right? Have you guys ever seen what digital camo is? Anyone? A computer figured out. Well, I'm just holding shift and I'm dragging my cursor at different sizes right now. Okay. A computer figured out that when you look at something from real far away, it's a series of pixel shapes blocked in. So the military was able to figure that out and apply that to clothing in the planes and stuff, these little blocks. And if you see little block textures from far away, someone could be in a plane looking for somebody, okay, and you can't see it because it's blocked in with these little block methods. They call this digital camo. So if you were to come over and pull up another window like this, and if you were to go to Google, this is a texture that you could paint. So if I were to type in digital camo, this has been predominantly used in lots of different areas. People use it in sporting goods. They have different versions of it. They have it for snow. North Face is using this currently in some of their outdoor lineup of jackets that are made for like walking and being out in different environments. Okay, so digital camo was created, and you can see military guys that have it. So you see, look at this guy. See how he blocks into the rock? That's how effective it is, because it's picking up sporadic patterns of dark and light, and then you can paint that in, and then that blends itself into part of the environment, because part of nature blends that way. You're like, well, why is Phil telling us this right now? Well, I'm telling you that because I want you to think about look, I could turn this into digital camo really quick. See how I took my marquee tool and I made all these selections? One of our first assignments coming up, I'm going to have you guys do some master paintings and renditions. One of them, I'm going to, not be mean, but I'm going to make you do it only using the lasso tool and the marquee tool. I'm going to have you do a whole painting of a world only using the marquee tool, because I want you to see the importance on how you can just block something up and hit fill and fill it. Okay. So what I could do right now is I can select this, hit B for brush, I hit Alt, I can select the darker color. Okay. Maybe make it a teeny bit darker, hit OK. And I can fill that with a color, right? Correct? I could go to edit and fill. I could paint it with a brush, right? Because it's a selection. It's on another layer that's separate. And what else could I do? I could do a gradient on it, right? So I could go to G right now and go. Now that looks horrible. Why? Because there's green in there. So let's go change the green color, and let's go color swab and grab this color and go to a lighter version, or maybe mid-tone about there. Now, I don't like my ants. Remember, Phil said ants suck to look at. So I'm going to hit Control H. It's so much easier. Now look what happens when I stroke. Cool. What happens? Let me make this color a little bit darker. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. What if I do it that way? Oh, that's sort of neat, right? What if I go that way instead? What if I do it this way? Check this out. If I go this way, and it's darker in that corner, if I hold Shift and then come back this way, oh, it's not doing it. It used to allow me to do a couple of different stroke patterns. That's all right. So I'll keep that one for now. Okay, I'm going to hit deselect. I've now put that on another layer, so I can look at that layer and go, you know what? This layer has this pattern. Let me drop the opacity down. Maybe I can blend that in there. That's sort of cool. It looks like sort of a different type of texture. There's all different ways to make textures. So you guys have to get used to doing the paint method, selection methods, fill methods, layer options, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to let you be. I'm going to let you work for the rest of class. Our goal is to finish a page of textures like that. See that? All different textures. Have fun. Okay, then after that, well, I think what I'm going to do is, I think on your last row here, I'm going to go put some textures up on the blog real quick that I want you to mimic. One's going to be stone, one's going to be wood, one's going to be brick or concrete. And then I'll walk you through how to do that. Okay, so let me pause the recorder real quick. Any other questions before we go? Paint? Okay. And I will be around to answer some questions, because some of you guys are new Photoshop artists and you're learning this stuff.